Okay, this is the follow-up video to the 6 best upgrades for your Honeybee King B2. We didn't do all 6, we decided to do 4 on this particular model. I'm not going to go through them step by step, but I want to point out a few things that were confusing to me first time around and might be helpful to you. So the first one that we did was the 43 tooth pulley, and see it right here, and they provide a belt that goes with it. Putting in the pulley is easy enough. The belt obviously is a little bit longer than the stock one because it's got to run through a larger pulley, so you need a little bit more length. The thing that really got me screwed up when I first put mine on my other heli was that with the stock tail, the rotor pin wasn't as far back on the stock motor, so when I put the new belt on, the belt was actually too long. And so what I ended up doing is, if you look at this helicopter back here, I ended up pulling the boom back, and then I had to drill a little set screw to hold it there. Once I went through the aluminum tail, you can see the tail rotor axis set back just a little bit further. Everything fits perfect. So those are really good things to do all at the same time. Easiest way to get the belt through is to put a string through the belt, run the strings through your tail boom, and then pull them through. One other thing I found kind of weird was that in the kit they provide these very small little bearings, little guide bearings, but they don't really fit all that well on the Honeybee for whatever. They're not even the same size as the belt. So anybody knows out there exactly what you're supposed to do with those? I'd like to know. I found that the stock ones actually work just fine, so I ended up leaving those in there. Okay, the next upgrade we did was the brushless motor and brushless ESC. So here's the motor. It's installed nicely, all set to go. I'll point out a couple things. One is, in order to get this thing on here, you're going to have to take out this screw and then the screws in between here, or in behind these wires there. You can see it now. And then these two, this piece right here pops out. Same thing on the other side, it pops out the other direction. Once you pull those things apart, then you can actually take this whole top section off. You have to take off the, you're going to have to loosen your night head as well in order to be able to flip this thing open. Because you really need to get underneath here so that you can very, very securely tighten these screws on the motor. The only other thing you have to look out for, I noticed that on the stock ESC, the way that they have it mounted, they had it mounted way up here, and it was really getting in the way of the cabin. You put on the cabin, and you couldn't get the cabin to go all the way to this landing skid where it needs to be. If it can't go all the way up to this landing skid, you're not going to be able to get the pin in back here. So on the new one, I set it back a little bit more. It's centered here. Gives me plenty of room to tie down the wires. Nice loose connections. Doesn't interfere with the cabin at all. Only unfortunately it gets the weight a little further back. It's nice to have the weight a little bit further forward, but if it gets in the way of the cabin, it kind of defeats the purpose. So that's that. You can have, doesn't really matter which way the wires come out. It just so happened that it worked out nicely to have the wires come out on the right side of the heli. It's the opposite way on my other helicopter, but works either way, whatever makes sense. Okay, the third upgrade that we did was the aluminum rotor and tail. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through these. I know there are other videos out there that discuss it in probably more detail. If you screw it up and you put it together wrong, you're going to find out pretty fast. There's really only a couple ways you're going to be able to put it together. It's helpful to have a couple of good pictures or some reference to do it, but the only thing I'm going to point out here that's really important, if it doesn't come with some thread locker, get some. Every single thing has to be thread locked unless you want to crash because some tiny little screw came off. That includes every single ball joint on here, all these Allen screws, anything with a thread on it, put thread locker in it. Takes a little while, it's a pain in the neck, but it has to be done. Last thing I'm going to point out on the rotor, when you're putting it together, you want to get your fly bar paddles in line with this bell piece here. Very important. You can see they're very well lined up, and you got to line it up with the one on the opposite side and the opposite paddle. All those things need to be flat. You can make up a jig to do it. I used a piece of wood with a hole drilled in it so I could set the whole assembly down inside flat and tighten it all up nice and flat. You can do anything you want. You can just eyeball it if you want, but whatever you can do to make that easier, the straighter and flatter you get it, the easier it is to make it fly and tune it. Last upgrade I want to talk about is the headlock gyro. This one is the Telebee Zoom. Nice little gyro, very, very small. Key things to notice, this one didn't come in with any instructions, so I had to do some look up online, fish around. Turns out, yes, it does need to be mounted sideways. One thing you can do, if you're not sure, you can actually take it off once you power it up, move it one way and see what the tail servo does, flip it up the other way, move it back and forth, see what the tail servo does. If it's not really doing anything in one direction, that's not the direction you want. If you get a lot of movement and it's really responding nicely, flipped up in a different direction, that's the one you want. Had some additional problems with this one. This one was used, I got it from some guy on eBay, and so you've got to take your chances. But right here, where these wires come out, I don't know if I can get a good shot of this or not. Right here, there were a lot of exposed wires right where it came out, and as it turned out, there was a very small piece of wire from one wire touching the exposed part of another wire, and of course it wasn't working at all. So I managed to use a razor blade and get them back, get them separated, and then I used some liquid electrical tape to seal it all up, and ever since I did that, it's actually working fine. So I went ahead with the installation and it's doing all right. The other option is, if you look at this heli over here, this one has the eSky 704B, and if you notice, it's mounted face to the sky. So whichever gyro you go with, make sure you get that done correctly.